Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to session 6 of our class on the digital age and faith. This week we're focusing on social media and how we use that to both project our digital self and how others use that to mine who we are as a digital self. So we talked a little bit last time about our digital identity, that we put ourselves out there and we selectively share. I mean, the way that we talk about this is, we put an avatar of ourselves out there. We put a representation, a image of ourselves out there, that we share certain things. We may share our likes, we may share who we're connected with, or shows that we go to, or pictures, or any number of other things. But we present a portion of our life out there and hold it up for others to see, but it's not everything of who we are. And on the same time, as we do that, that's being looked at and mined and used for things like advertising and other things that we've talked about in other places. So as we move into the world of social media, this is where this projection of the digital self really begins to become a full-time activity for people. I mean, it becomes something that we've really all of a sudden moved from just suggesting things about ourselves to, here I am, here, let me share all these things about myself. And let me create this this picture that you can look at to see who is Neil, who is whoever you happen to be looking at. Here's what's going on with all these other people who I may have strong or I may have weak connections in my life. And so, when we share things on social media, typically we share things like hobbies, or when we're successful, or food, or pets, pictures of things. Political discourse, frequently not really discourse, more of a diatribe of, here's what you should think and here's why you should think this. We can use it to stay connected, but we also get a lot of things that are, like the old pyramid schemes or the chain mail, where, oh, well, forward this and you're going to receive $10 million in the next day, and I don't know of anybody who has. And I'll be honest, as a pastor, there is nothing that if you don't forward it, you're not going to heaven. There's nothing that if you don't forward this, Jesus is not going to love you. So there's some good things out there as far as connections, and I do think that one of the things that people value the most is pictures. That's one of the things that gets looked at and seen and valued. We do want to see pictures of the people who we care about. We do want to see what's going on in their life. We do want to hear updates from them. But we also sort through a lot of the other stuff. And so a lot of times we have lots of different feelings when we can check in with social media. Sometimes it makes us feel better, it makes us feel connected. Sometimes it can make us feel less worthy, or judged, or unhappy, or angry, or excluded. Sometimes it leads us into temptation. Sometimes we feel like we're being taunted. I mean, the whole reality of, when we put ourselves out there, that other people will judge the self that we put out there. And all of these things are real. And one of the things that I think is important to talk about when we talk about social media is that basic human desire for connection. We as humans are very, very social creatures. We are designed, and our minds are designed to want connection with other people. We want to be liked, loved, valued, feel safe. Those are some of the basic needs that we have, and sometimes those needs are more important than even some of the things like food and water. If we know from one of the things I've been seeing come up a lot in research lately is, we're beginning to realize that one of the best predictors of longevity is a strong network of social connections. That you have people who you can go to, who you can rely on, who you can trust, who love you and who you love. And if you have those, your life tends to be longer and better. If you don't have those, your life tends to be shorter than even some of the things that we know are big time limiters of lifespan. So things like smoking or environmental pollution or obesity, these may not shorten your life as much as a lack of social connections. It's vital to our health. We want to be connected with other people, and we want to feel like other people love us. I think that's one of the reasons why when you put something out there and people like about it, or they comment about it in positive ways, it makes you feel good. And when you put something out there and nobody says anything about it, or they comment on it negatively, it makes you feel bad. I mean, we don't often think about the impact of this, but the reality is that our minds are wired to receive that connection, and when we receive it, it's like a drug. So I want you to think about to when you fell in love for the first time. And I think most people have had this experience where you fall in love and all of a sudden everything seems right with the world. Everything seems good. It feels like you're walking on air. And, you know, that's our brain saying, hey, I'm valued, I'm loved, I'm cared for, I belong. We also know those moments when we feel like we've been rejected. And it feels like, you know, our heart is broken into a million pieces and it feels like our world's at an end and we don't feel good. You know, we want connection, but how do we talk about connection? And, you know, I'm going to pull on one of my favorite researchers and authors, a woman named Brene Brown out of the University of Houston. She's a PhD in social work. She's done a lot of work on connection and shame, among other things. But you know, the reason she ended up studying shame is because it's the flip side of connection. A lot of times when we talk about the things that we want, it's easier to talk about the things that we don't have. We talk about it from a negative perspective. So, you know, you talk about, hey, I want to feel loved, I want to feel valued, but what we remember is the times when we don't feel loved, when we don't feel valued, when we felt like, hey, here's all this part of that. And that is what she labels as shame, and I think appropriately. Shame, as she labels it, is the fear of disconnection. You know, somehow that we're either psychologically or emotionally or cognitively or spiritually, you know, we want this connection, and in some way we've just been told that we don't belong. We don't belong. We aren't loved. We aren't valued. That some part of us is wrong. So how she defines shame is this. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love or belonging. And this is out of her work, Daring Greatly. She lists 12 categories of shame. So appearance and body image, money and work, motherhood, fatherhood, family, parenting, mental and physical addiction, or mental and physical health, addiction, sex, aging, religion, surviving trauma, and being stereotyped or labeled. And some of these are more common shame categories that women feel, and some are more common that men feel, but we all feel some of these in each way. So for example, appearance and body image is something that women are probably a little more attuned to, and it's something that, because of the way that women experience shame, that comes out more frequently. Money and work, on the other hand, is something that, because of the way men are socialized and the way men value things, is something that is a very strong shame trigger for them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the breakdown between women and men. And again, this is coming out of her work, but I think it's very, very applicable. So for women, she describes it as a web, this interwoven connections of the things that we're supposed to be, the things that we should be. How we should be, how we're supposed to look, how you're supposed to fit all the expectations that everybody puts on you, and you're supposed to make it look easy. You know, so you should be able to be successful at work, be a wonderful mother, be attractive, and you know, not you know, be assertive without being pushy, and make all these balances, make everybody else happy, so that everybody looks on you and says, wow, what a great person she is. And it's a real struggle because nobody can live up to that. And the reality is that the web is not this uniform thing to where, you know, everybody's looking for the same things. And so women, for example, are often criticized on how they are mothering because they're not doing the way that somebody else thinks that they should be doing it. And those criticisms can be incredibly hard and incredibly demeaning. They also hit us at our deepest points of insecurity. And while all that is important, I think that we need to understand the way that both women and men experience shame. For women, it's not meeting those expectations. And so again, things like body image, motherhood, family, parenting, and then aging and being stereotyped. You know, those are things that women feel extremely well and are extremely hard. And I think in our culture especially, that image, body image and aging go together, to where a woman is expected to continue to look young and attractive and beautiful, where men, there's that longer range where men are continue to look at as being attractive and being valuable. There's a reason in that. I mean, I think there's a reason that women typically marry older men rather than men marrying younger women or older women. But I do think that a lot of times we neglect the way that men feel shame as well. And again, this is from a story that Brene Brown told. She told of when she was doing her initial research. It was all on women. And a man had come up to her after one of her presentations and said, "Well, what do you write about men?" And she said, "Well, I've only researched women." And he says, "Well, that's convenient." And so she does go in and start talking about what men feel as far as shame. And for men, shame is different. It is all about failure, and it's that failure to be strong enough, good enough, wealthy enough, provide enough. And so a lot of things that are shame triggers for men are things that we don't even think about sometimes. So you come home and you tell your husband, "Hey, well, look at what John down the street was able to do for Janine, and the great car that he just bought her." And it's all of a sudden that person may be in that shame place of, "Hey, I'm doing everything I can, and we're trying to make the bills work, and I know it's a great car and everything, and I feel bad that I can't provide that for you." So shame for men is failure. It's being perceived as being wrong or weak or being fearful, being any number of other things, and it goes back to that kind of the fear of being the guy who's pushed up against the lockers and who can't take care of himself, and by extension can't take care of other people. And men are taught very early that they can't really show a lot of their emotions. They can't really show vulnerability. They can't, it's the whole balance of, we're told, "Hey, you want us to be vulnerable." And yet the very second that we do that, we're looked upon as being weak, as somehow being lesser. And I think a lot of men can do this. I can look back in my own life at the time when I learned when I wasn't allowed to cry, for example. When I wasn't allowed to show sadness over something, and it goes back into pretty early in elementary school for me. I'd had a time where, a fish tank had broken, and I was walking to school, and I was crying about the fact that this, the fish that lived in my room at that point, that they were dying, or that I thought that they were dying at that point. And I'm crying, and I have one of my buddies who's walking with me saying, "You can't cry about this. You're not allowed to." And it's that very early lesson of, hey, this is who I can't be as, even a very, very young man or a very, young boy. And all of these things, one of the reasons I think that sometimes we come away from social media, feeling we long for disconnection and we feel disconnection, is we hit those things that play on those shame triggers. We hit those things that say, "Hey, you're not a good mother, or you're not a good father, or you're not providing enough for your spouse or your wife, or you're not pretty enough, you're not sexy enough, you're not any of these things." When we compare ourselves against the best projection that other people may do. So we may see people who project a perfect family. They have that perfect picture of their kids, and their hair's all combed, and they're dressed all nice, and they all are coordinated, and they're all sitting there smiling. Now we're seeing that one little snapshot in time that may not reflect the 3 hours it took to get that picture. But we compare ourselves against that. We compare ourselves against the lives that we think others are living, and we measure our own perceptions of failure against that. And again, we go in seeking that connection, and the reality is the people who design these things, they know that we're seeking connection. They're designed for that. But we also frequently feel that disconnection from it. When we think about connection, I want to just kind of go back to that idea of why do people do some of the things that we do? Why do we do some of the things, the crazy things we do when we're in love with another person? Or why do young men and women join a gang? Well, they're looking for that connection and they're looking for a place where they belong. Why do men and women athletes who are a part of a team go through incredible, physical pain to be a part of that? Well, part of it's belonging to the team. Part of it's, yes, here's where I'm doing to develop myself, but part of it is that group of men or women that you're a part of that you want to feel valued by. We all want to feel valued. We all want to feel like we matter. And again, one of the dangers is either we go into this and we become addicted to that need to be wanted, that need to be liked. And again, our brain rewards us when we feel like, hey, people like what we're doing. And that can lead us into, hey, what do I do to make all these other people happy? Rather than doing that which is what I really should be doing in the first place. And on the other side, when we come out of it and we feel depressed or we feel anxious or we feel shame because we're looking at what other people are doing and we're not measuring up in our own eyes, that's where it can also make us unhappy. I talked when we talked about advertising about the command not to covet. I think part of that is, we were designed, we're supposed to be able to be content with what we have. And yet when we're continually presented with what other people have or what we think other people have, it makes us feel like, hey, well, do I have enough? Am I enough? Am I good enough for all of these things? So one of the other things that happens sometimes in social media is a lowering of social boundaries. So I talked about this a little bit with texting last time where, people feel safer, rather than going up to somebody and talking to them, going up and rather than having the hard conversation to break up with somebody face to face or over the phone, that they would send a text saying, hey, it's over. It's that cutoff. Hey, it's safer to do it this way. It feels less painful to do it this way. And I think the same thing can happen on social media. So, for example, one piece of this is the reality of trolling, where people will say things to a person over social media that are incredibly damaging or bullying or mean-spirited that they would never say to a person face-to-face because it doesn't feel as real. And yet, many people in my congregation have heard me with my little reworded proverb. Most of us grew up with sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But I've always said, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will send me to therapy. That there are many times where words can hurt every bit as much as a physical as a physical wound, and sometimes they take longer to get over. So one of the things that we come in seeking that connection, and then somebody for their own reasons, whether it's to try and make themselves feel better or superior, or whether it's just to be mean, or to be a bully, they come in and they tear you down, and they do it in a way that they would never feel comfortable doing in person. It may be even somebody who you don't even know. And that's one of the dangers is, as you kind of spread that broader and broader web, is that, we build these bridges of connections and sometimes trolls lurk underneath. I wrote a poem about that a long time ago. So that's one of the dangers that sometimes comes with social media and with this reality is that we lower our social boundaries, and sometimes we reveal the basest parts of ourselves. We act in ways that we would never act to a person face to face, or we feel permission to say things that, quite honestly, we should never say. And on the other side, on the flip side, those things are now being recorded. And I remember last time, right before the NFL draft, one of the quarterbacks who was up for the draft and was going to go in the first round, right before the draft, it came out that he'd said some things when he was like, a teenager that were inappropriate on social media, and they were preserved there. They were locked in, and now he had to address them all these years later. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more, this particular topic a little bit more when we get to talking about the dangers of social media as well. But it's the idea of the bunker effect. So one of the things that social media and all of these media do to try to keep us engaged, they want to keep us logged on, they want to keep us continually coming back because they show us what we think we want to see. And so what we can end up with is a bunker effect, where we're surrounded by people who think and act and believe like we do. And so you end up in this kind of cloistered bunker of one way of thinking and beginning to think more and more that the other people who don't think like you are stupid or wrong or dangerous or even your enemy. You know, if you go to, for example, in Facebook, you can find where Facebook has pegged what your political identity is, whether you are extremely liberal, moderate, conservative, or extremely conservative. And it's going to continue to show you things based on what you have either said, hey, I don't want to see this, or that you've clicked on, that continue to follow that pattern. And it can lead you down into, hey, everybody thinks like me, everybody acts like me. One of the things I know that from my own congregation, you know, one of the blessings of my community is that we are a people who are not like-minded. That we gather together people who are, you know, from extremely conservative to extremely liberal, and they're together in the same place, and this may be one of the few places where we sometimes can have those conversations. But I do think one of the dangers is, again, as you begin to push, hey, here's all these positions that think and act and sound exactly like I think they should, you know, here's what I need to do to fit into this. So either we fit in so that we can feel safe and secure in this bunker, or we begin to think that everybody in the world thinks like this group of people does. Let me go to the next piece of this, and you know, social media are advertising platforms. They are not news platforms. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't link news into them, and I do know that there are a lot of people who feel like, hey, here's where I get the important news to come up in the midst of the day. But social media are not, they're advertising platforms. They're not news platforms. They're not designed for this. They are not, you know, as much as, you know, you're getting pressure to do this. They're not censoring things. They're not pulling things out very much. And, you know, the reality is that the perspective and the reality that you can be presented within them can be very, very skewed. Social media are designed for addictiveness. Now, this goes back to some of the things we were talking about when we were doing the internet, with talking about things like Netflix or whatever that are designed, you know, taking away the stopping cue. So, you know, Facebook has no stopping cue. That's part of it. But the other piece of it is things like Instagram or Snapchat, where you have your streams where, you know, it's that, hey, keep using this and keep doing this every day. And, you know, if you do this every day, then you'll be rewarded for that. And again, those are things that are designed to give us, to keep us addicted to it, keep us going back to the technology again and again and again and again. And again, I don't think that technology is evil. I just think it's important to realize this is what it's doing, and the reason it's doing it is because it's getting its money based on how often it's used and by what it can present as far as advertising. Now, again, as a faith leader, I try to frame these from a faith perspective. And as I was thinking about social media and the projection of the digital self, and also the mining of it, I mean, again, as you put it out there, it's continually being evaluated and mined, not only for advertisement, but by other people who are looking at it. But as we talk about who we are, you know, as a Christian, you know, for me, it goes back to who I am as a person formed in God's image. You know, as the creation narrative in Genesis talk about that male and female, God created them in God's image. God created them. You know, that we are people who are created in God's image, and we have value because of that. And then particularly as a Christian, you know, that goes back to my identity that I come from in baptism. You know, that, you know, I am reminded as part of my Lutheran theology, at least, that, you know, I am a baptized child of God, that there's nothing that can change that for me. I have a plaque that hangs on my wall that says, Neil Eric White, you are a baptized child of God. Remember that. That is the basis of everything else that you will ever be. That I have this piece of my identity that I've been claimed and named and called by God that says, you know, I will never forget you. Like your mother will never forget you, or your father will never forget you. I will never forget you. You are mine, and there's nothing that can take that away from you. And so in the midst of all these other pieces of where people are trying to either show us who we should be, or, we're trying to act like we should be on these things. And then also the places where we get, that reward of, hey, people liking and valuing this. On the other side, for me, there should be that reality that, these things still matter. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm hardwired for connection. There's no way I'm going to change that. But I continually have to remind myself that that's not what's most important. For me, I have value already. I have worth already, and there's nothing that can change that and take that away. So no matter what goes on out in the social media sphere or in the digital world in general, that I still have value, I still have worth, and so does everybody else. And for me, that means that, even when I disagree with somebody, I'm not going to attack them in a way that's trying to demean them or attack their insecurities, although I know how to do that. I think we've all been trained how to do that growing up. Part of it is, how do I learn to encounter people in the social media age when they're dealing with things like shame over appearance and body image, or feeling like they're not good enough at work, or not making enough money, or not a good enough mother or father, or that their family may be broken. How do I encounter them as a person who says, you know what, you still have value, you still have worth, you're still worthy of connection? All right, well, I'm going to wrap this up on this note that, again, I think social media enables us to do some connection that we wouldn't do otherwise. I think it can be a place where we can experience that connection with a broad network of people. But I also think it's important to be aware of, some of the dangers of it. But ultimately, we should be able to encounter people as people worthy of connection. And so thank you for watching. Be sure to check back next week. We'll continue on talking about dating in a digital age, which, I had to re-encounter in my early 40s, and again, was different than it was when I was in my 18 to 22-year-old self. So again, thank you for watching. Have a great week.